All right, guys, how you doing today? Hope you guys have had a wonderful weekend. I know those of us that were able to go on the King's Dominion trip surely did, and you can probably hear it in my voice, a little bit of screaming on the roller coasters there, so I apologize for that, but I'm excited to get into our lesson today and talk about it a little bit. And I was thinking about how I've done it in the past, and I have been remiss to offer prayer. And so let's go ahead and start with that. Lord, I just want to lift up all the teachers that are going to be teaching today. Lord, I just want to just pray that they lift up your name and lift up your word, and you anoint their lips and the ears of the children that are going to be hearing, Lord, and that will be in concert with the things that are going on in your body, Lord, and in your church, that we would be in tune with that and in tune with your word, and bring those two things together, God, and that we'd be cohesive as a team as well. Lord, I pray that you anoint my mind right now to bring a little bit of teaching, a little bit of context, and a little bit of perspective on today's lesson, and that this would be received well and be beneficial to those that hear it, and improve our teaching and improve the quality of what we're giving to our kids, God. And just thank you and praise you and glorify you. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so with that done, let's take a look at our lesson for this week. So let's go title slide here. And I'm being fancy again. I've got my pen out, so you can expect me to draw on the screen. So we've got our son request wisdom. And this is Solomon. So we're getting introduced to Solomon. Hopefully you're not getting introduced to Solomon. Maybe the kids are, so keep that in mind. You might not know who he is. Hopefully they know who David is by this point. Don't try to assume too much whenever we're teaching. And just keep that in mind. We bring that to them, and just bring your own blend and mix of background, context, presentation, and relational teaching to the classroom, and then you'll see success. So we'll start off as we have in the past with our text. So this is a little bit longer. This is broken up into 2 slides, just so you know. Whenever you get up there, we've been having a little bit of trouble with the slideshows. I want to see if I can get that figured out. I'm not quite sure what's going on with that, but hopefully that'll be squared away. But we have 1 Kings 3, 5 through 15. And this is broken up through 2 slides, like I mentioned. And so as we start reading, if you're looking here, the first 2 words ought to engender a question. At Gibeon. So at Gibeon, well, where's Gibeon? Well, guess what? We're not actually going to talk about that. But maybe a better question would be, what is Gibeon? And we'll see that by going back and looking at our context a little bit, a few verses before that. So try to ignore the Hebrew on the side. I had that up looking at something else that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But let's just read the first couple verses of this chapter. So it says, later, Solomon, that should ask another question, what happened before? But just disregard that. All right, so later Solomon formed an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, by marrying his daughter. Solomon brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the house of the Lord, as well as the wall around Jerusalem. The people, however, were still sacrificing on the high places, because a house for the name of the Lord had not yet been built. And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. Now, the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for it was a great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar there. Okay, so the plot is thickened a little bit here when we back up a couple verses. So we see, let me actually go back to that other one, that the people are guilty of sacrificing at high places. and we find Solomon at Gibeon, which was one of these great high places. And I didn't find this naturally. I was doing a little bit of research and preparing for this, and they suggested that verse 3, where it talks about him saying, "Except that he sacrificed," I'll just underline it here so you can see it, if I don't ruin everything, "and burned incense on the high places." All right, and so it was suggested that this might be a little bit of a precursor to what's going to happen to Solomon later. And the fact that he is going to give over the city to the various temples and sacrificial places and altars and high places and things like that for foreign gods of his foreign wives. So we kind of have both elements of that here. Where you have him making an alliance with Pharaoh, not necessarily a bad thing, marrying his daughter, which was customary at the time. And even David had multiple wives as well. That was a cultural norm back then, not something that would continue on in this era of the church. So we're not going to go down that rabbit trail. But you see the two elements here. You see he's married to Pharaoh's daughter. You see him sacrificing at the high places. And it's at one of these high places that God meets him. So let's back up to our slide, and we'll just read from that, make it easier for you. Let me get rid of that. Okay. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon. So at that high place, the Lord, there's our all caps Lord. Again, that's the divine name, Yahweh. Might not be a bad thing to point out. Appeared to Solomon in a dream at night. God said, "Ask, what should I give you?" And Solomon replied, "You have shown great and faithful love to your servant." Okay, let's stop right there. So great and faithful love is the thing that I mentioned earlier that I was looking at, and that is a Hebrew word, chesed. Chesed. Don't expect you to use that word. It might be, maybe you could pull your concordance out and find that. It might be a little tough finding it as hesed, but you can find it. Oh, goodness, I haven't used a paperback concordance in a while, so I forget how to do it. But you can find that in there, and this is a central core concept in the Old Testament: the chesed of God, the great and faithful love, the loving kindness of God. I think it goes by faithfulness. I was looking at a couple translations earlier. I think one of them does say faithfulness or faithful love. All good translations all get at the meaning of it. Another way you could think about it is God's covenant love. May not have as much meaning to us today, in that we don't enter into covenants with people in day-to-day activities. We do sign contracts. That's a little bit different, especially if you're a fan of pro sports, right? We nullify contracts left and right, and they're virtually meaningless in many cases, but that's not the case with the covenant. And so this is God's covenant love to his people, and that's a theme that runs throughout the theme that runs throughout the entire Old Testament, in that God is faithful to his people based on his covenant. And let me just read you this real quick. I thought this was pretty good. This is actually from the same book I made the other connection from. So it says, "Through the covenant, God both reveals what he is like and obliges himself to a particular course of action. His loyalty, chesed, to the covenant frequently leads him to acts of grace and mercy, but justice is also built into the covenant to ensure accountability to his people." Or ensure accountability by the people. All right, so that's something that would be good to bring out, and that comes up in one of the later slides, God's love. And I just want to mention this little section of scripture right here is just packed with stuff. I'm going to try and hit on as much as I can, but I want to keep it about 20 minutes, of course, so you guys can actually watch it. All right, all right. So he's been faithful, shown faithful love to his servant. My father David. I'll just brush this. So the servant of God motif or concept is also one that we find throughout Scripture Moses called the servant of God, one who met with God face to face. Of course, and David also following into that category. So another thing to bring up, perhaps, because he walked before you in faithfulness, righteousness, and integrity. You have continued this great and faithful love for him by giving him a son to sit on his throne, as it is today. Lord my God, you have now made your servant king in my father's place, yet I am just a youth. So we kind of find him in the same position as David. David was but a youth when he was anointed king. He didn't become king until he was a little bit older and accomplished warrior. But we find here Solomon becoming king as a youth, and kind of the same way David did. All right. Let me find my place here. So, yet I am just a youth with no experience in leadership. Your servant is among your people you have chosen, a people too many to be numbered or counted. So give your servant a receptive heart to judge your people and to discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? All right, so we have some more things here. He's recounted himself as a young man that's not able to lead, and has talked about the numerical superiority of his people as well, of God's people. And this is a fulfillment of the Abrahamic promise. All right. And so what this is all about. That's what the Bible is about. Covenant is a central concept, and this is part of that covenant, that God would make of Abraham's seed a nation as numerous as the stars. It's a bad paraphrase. Go ahead and look that up, before we share it to the kids. But and so we see that developing throughout the Bible, and how they become more and more numerous. Now they're so numerous they can't be numbered. And so we have another aspect of covenant here, covenant of being fulfilled. And what I was going to say just before is that the kingship or the kingdom was looked at as being, they were hoping that would be the ultimate fulfillment of the covenant. Look, we're great and numerous, we've captured the land, we have a king, we've built a temple, and they're looking to that. That's what the writers are looking for, is this ultimate fulfillment of that covenant. Of course, we know what the ultimate fulfillment is. So your servant is among your people who have chosen, a people too many to be numbered or counted. So give your servant a receptive heart to judge your people and to discern between good and evil. All right. So what does that bring up in mind? To discern between good and evil, we have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, so we're getting back into even a little bit of garden imagery here. We're tracing that story out. Well, maybe Solomon's going to be the one to take us back to the Eden ideal, so to speak. Of course, we know that's not the case. He didn't do that. So these are all things that you can kind of tie in a little bit. I wouldn't suggest maybe trying to do all of them, but all these concepts are coming together in this passage here and are informing how we think about it. So, and so he says, "For who is able to judge this great people of yours?" All right. I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't look that word up, the judge word, but he's not a judge; he's a king. And so we kind of see a difficult transition from judges to kings. From Samuel, who was a judge, a prophet, and Saul, who was a king, but really he exhibited many of the characteristics of a judge. He was a great military leader, things like that. David as well, great military leader, but he was spiritual and followed after God in a way that the judges didn't. Now we get to Solomon. So I don't know if that actually plays in there. I just thought I would share it. But now please the Lord that Solomon had requested this. So God said to him, "Because you have requested this and did not ask for long life or riches for yourself, or the death of your enemies, but you asked discernment for yourself to administer justice, I will therefore do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has never been anyone like you before you, and never will be again." So the wise and understanding heart, too. We think about heart. Obviously we know, he's not talking about the beating organ within your chest, but the word heart in Hebrew, levav or lev, it has a more full sense than just heart. Like even heart, the way we think of it today. Like I poured my heart and soul into this lesson. When I say that, you think my emotions, my will, maybe something like that. Well, the heart even goes to the mind and the thoughts in Hebrew, and it actually gets translated as mind, I believe, in Proverbs. In the English Standard Version, anyways. But so it's that fluid in meaning, that expansive in meaning, that it can be mind. So you take that and chew on it, if you will. So that there's, I will give to you a wise and understanding heart, so that there's never been anyone like you before you, and never will be again. In addition, I will give you what you did not ask for, both riches and honor, so that no king will be your equal during your entire life. If, big if, right? You walk in my ways and keep my statutes and commands, just as your father David did. I will give you a long life. Then Solomon woke up and realized that it had been a dream. He went to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, and held a feast for all his servants. So the Davidic covenant, which Solomon was a part of, was conditional. All right, that was conditioned upon certain requirements, that they follow after the Lord, that they not lead the people into apostasy, which that's kind of surprising to me. I was thinking about this a little bit when I was preparing. That David is a man after God's own heart. David is the man who was chosen by God to be king. David was the man who was given the plans for the temple. And he's kind of the archetype king, right? You think King David, but his son, if we look at the first couple verses that we read to start off with, was sacrificing at the high places. Okay. Was sacrificing at the high places of presumably not Yahweh, right? Because it says here he came back to where the ark was and then sacrificed there. And so it's kind of interesting to me that David's faith didn't really get passed down to his son. And we actually see that, with all of David's family, really, right? I think it was last week's lesson with David and Bathsheba, or maybe it was the week before, which says the sword would not depart from David's family because of the sin that he had committed. And so I think you see that playing out in the narrative, in the story. Obviously the big one is Absalom, right? Absalom rebels against him. But then you also see, with Solomon. I mean, he doesn't see warfare. He reaps the benefits of David's conquest and David's warfare, but he doesn't pick up the spirituality, the relationship with God that David had. And so that's something to think about. Maybe something to point out, something to talk about. That it's important for us to do that our actions do have consequences. And, Paul talked about, with Timothy, he said, you have many teachers, but not many fathers. And, we have an option, when we come into the classroom, we're going to be a teacher, or we're going to be a father or a mother, for the men and the ladies out there, and so it's a very real thing. It's something I definitely have to wrestle with. Am I going to be a father when I walk in there? I don't have any kids, but I do, right? I have to approach them like I am their father and tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear, right? And so think about that whenever you're doing your teaching as well, that it's fully possible for you, I hope you can see my finger pointing, you and me, right, to have a good relationship with Jesus and not pass that on both to biological children, but also our spiritual. So just keep that in mind as you go in there. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to pass it along. We want them to be better than us, right? I want them to go on and do way better things than I've done and what I'm going to do, right? And for them to stand on our shoulders and reach new heights. So, keep that in mind there. So, you see then there in verse 15, Solomon coming back to the place of the covenant, where the ark was. The ark was the symbol of the covenant. And he offers the sacrifices there. So that's just a little bit on the passage. I wanted to talk a little bit about this as well. So God is omniscient. Scripture teaches that God is all-knowing. He is the one who has perfect knowledge, and his knowledge extends to all things past, present, and future. I want to stop right there. So it's best to think of God as existing not in time, but outside of it. So if you think of God, think of yourself. I use a lot of sports analogies, so I apologize for that. But say you're watching The Office. I'll break from the sports analogies. You're watching The Office, and you've seen the episode before because you're a freak like me and you like to watch The Office, right? You already know what's going to happen, okay? But you don't influence. You don't have anything to do. Well, that's not a good way of saying it either. So you know what's going to happen at the end of the episode, right? But it's not necessarily that you caused it, okay? And so I don't know if that's the best way for me to talk about that, but think of God as not detached from reality, and not totally transcendent, and never interacting, because he definitely interacts in our world, but in terms of time. So in terms of time, like yesterday, today, tomorrow, 1,000 years from now, God's kind of sees all of that at once and sees how it has played out, rather than thinking of him knowing what's past, present, and future. Think of him looking at it as like a painting on the wall, or a timeline. We can look at a timeline and see what's happened, in 80, 50, up till 2019 now. So kind of maybe think of it that way. I've found that useful to use that analogy, and maybe point them at the wall and say, hey, from this pillar to that pillar, that's the beginning of time, that's the end of time, and God's looking at it like we're looking at it now. And so he can see everything that happens in between the two pillars, and that's kind of the way then he does interact in time and space and reality, throughout history, of course, especially obviously with Jesus. That was the ultimate one. Okay, so we have our past, present, and future, including the future decisions of his free creatures. Okay, his knowledge is complete, and he is outside of time. Well, I could have just read through it, and there they say he's outside of time. He has known from all eternity whatever will come to pass in response to God's omniscience. We admit our finite knowledge and trust his decisions are wise and good. And so this comes back then again to our idea of covenant, right? And so God can keep covenant because he's omniscient. Okay, because he knows. Right? He gave Solomon a legitimate choice there, right? He gave him a legitimate choice. And he said, "What do you want?" And Solomon asked for a wise and discerning heart, and so he gave him other things as well. And so I kind of, anytime I talk about this, I always think of the Matrix, where like they're sitting down at if you've seen it, the Oracle. She offers Neo a piece of candy. He's like, I don't want it. And she's like, oh yeah, dude, you'll take it. And then he takes it. And then they have this big discussion about like, well, were you predestined to take it, or did you actually choose to take it? But I knew you were going to take it, and you took it. And he's like, whatever, And so it's this really timeless question, you know, and it's a really, I think you'll be surprised by what the questions that the kids will ask and how they'll kind of wrestle with it a little bit. And so that might be a fun one, park one for a little bit. And another thing that I have found useful, and I didn't prepare this to share with you, is like taking the word omniscient in order to help them understand what it means. You can take like omni, and then science, and like say science, that's knowledge. And then omni is everything, so I'm not sure what a good omni word would be. Kind of break it up that way and talk about it. Just about done here. So let's talk about, I'm actually going to, I think, do Christ connection here. So Solomon reigned with great wisdom and insight, yet he was still an imperfect king who needed God's forgiveness. Solomon foreshadows the coming of a greater King Jesus, in whom are hidden all the treasure of wisdom and knowledge. And that is so very true. And we have at our fingertips, actually closer than at our fingertips, someone who has greater knowledge and wisdom than the wisest person who ever lived. And it's really a gift. It's really a beautiful thing that residing within us. And I want to just mention something, you know, since we're talking about Solomon and, you know, the temple and stuff, that we, I think it's easy, and this is something sort of new that I've been learning, you know, that it's not only that you yourself are the temple of the Holy Spirit. In Western culture, we're very individualistic. And so that sticks out to us when we read, you know, Paul saying that you're the temple of the Holy Spirit. But we also, as a body, as a people of God, as a covenant people of God, are the temple collectively. Okay? And so there can be no, I would suggest that there can be no full revelation of God without the communal aspect of it as well. I'd be open to debate on that, but it's a good thought. You know, and so think about that. You know, Peter says that we're to be built up into I didn't really start writing these passages down, so I don't have to wing it out of my poor memory. Being built up into what's it, a holy, your living stones being built into I want to say holy temple, but I know that's not it. But we're all pieces of the temple, right? All right, so yeah. Anyways, maybe I'll stop going off the cuff in the next video, right? But if I didn't go off the cuff, it wouldn't be me, right? It'd be something else. All right. So just keep some of those things in mind, you know. And I think, as I always say, this is not like if I'm sitting in on your class and I don't hear you use anything that I mentioned, I'm not going to be mad. I just hope that maybe it deepens your reading of Scripture and your relationship with God, because that's part of the game too. It's part of the structure as well as we're to be growing, and hopefully I'm able to facilitate some of that as well. So that's it for today. God bless you guys. I know that you're going to do an awesome job coming up this week, and I look forward to seeing it. We'll see you this Sunday.